It's first of all, thank you very much for letting us have this space, and it's always fantastic to hear somebody introduce fecal sludge management as a space that's cool. We're very privileged to be part of this community this morning. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the Sanitation and Hygiene Fund, working closely with our colleague Guy. And for those of you who might not yet know the Sanitation and Hygiene Fund, we focus on catalysing finance for the sanitation economy in LMICs. So one of our biggest challenges is to identify and help build a pipeline of investable propositions that investors are willing to finance. We know that that's an uphill struggle, and so we're building data and building tools to help us to achieve that. So basically, in approaching this, we know it's not enough to describe the many consequences of unplanned or unreliable management, or the plight of informal private services. These facts on their own are just not leading to finance. They're not convincing the people who need to put the money into the space. And we also have to move beyond just describing the cost of inaction. So we're working to build an understanding and make the bridge between governments that are often unable to articulate where the sector is in terms of its maturity and economic potential, and the needs of financial institutions that are looking for a return on investment and in impact targets. So as was introduced, Guy is going to take you through a specific piece of work that's in our portfolio to define and express the sanitation economy in terms of market maturity. And we're really looking forward to having a discussion with you. So over to Guy to take us through the deck, and then for us to answer any questions through discussion. Thank you, Guy.
Thank you very much, Sue. And it's great to see so many of you on the line. Some former colleagues, many who I've already spoken with around the SANEMAT. So SANEMAT is a provisional title or an acronym, but yeah, we so far we like it, and we're seeking feedback on the name of this tool. And I will go through quite a detailed presentation. Thank you for your patience in advance. The overview of this webinar is to first justify why we need yet another tool, and to describe the theory of change and what value added the SANEMAT may bring. And who are the main audiences viewed through the primary perspective, the scope and focus of SANEMAT, and then I'll go through the way the tool has been formulated so far is 10 maturity pillars and 7 investor questions. And then I'll reflect a bit on how to select indicators amongst many hundreds of competing indicators, and go through the next steps and suggest some questions for today's discussion. So why the SANEMAT? I think Sue has already, and Michaela have already sort of justified a little bit why we need this. But we need to understand better to what extent sanitation is investable, and how we can strengthen markets and the economies more broadly to make sanitation more investment ready. And also, what different roles do public and private investment have in the sanitation economy? We often find public investment crowding out potential private investment. So we've got to make sure each sort of different types of money and player play the roles that they should play to bring the most investment of the right kind to sanitation. So to answer these and other questions requires a comprehensive understanding of the sanitation economy. And through the conversations I've had with over 40 sector institutions, I think most of them, it would be true to say, have said that this tool is needed. There are other tools we've got to make sure we're not duplicating, but it's is perceived to be a value added to the sector. So I think the theory of change, this is a very simple theory of change, justifies why we need an additional tool to attract investment to sanitation. Investments currently are inadequate, and current investments are not adequately informed by correct knowledge on the market opportunities and risks, or what are the most impactful sanitation and hygiene investments. So many potential investors, and we do talk about even potential trillions of investment money out there for development overall. The money often goes to other sectors because investors see clearer rates of return and lower risks. So we need to understand these better in order to address them. And the provision of comprehensive, relevant, credible, and up-to-date information on sanitation economies and markets in different countries would enable informed investments and decision-making by a range of stakeholders, and bring a focus on how to improve the investment environment. So such information we need to present in a clearly structured way to enable rapid understanding and further analysis, and to have a common language and common understanding across players. The government and public sector players really need to understand investors' needs and concerns much better in order to address them. So in doing this work, we have interviewed a lot of stakeholders so far, and through a internet review, we've also found other tools and frameworks out there. So we've spoken with almost every other tool provider. There's the UN Water Glass, which is a biannual survey. There's the Africa Water Investment Programme Scorecard, which has been piloted and is being scaled up in Africa. Of course, that is much broader than just sanitation. Then there's EquiServe, which is a sanitation focused more in urban areas at the moment. There's Citywide Inclusive Sanitation, which has been adopted by many large sector organizations. And there are various frameworks emerging from that. There's WIN, so I'll go a bit quicker. There's WashPals, there's OECD framework, which has been piloted in 2 countries and will be rolled out, and that's more broadly water security. There's UNICEF's WASH bottleneck analysis tool. There's WSUP's functionality framework. There's IMI's investment climate indicators, which is in early stages. There's Sanovation, which is not a publicly available tool, but it was shared for the purposes of the study. And there's IDE's Market System Resilience Index, also fairly new. So some of these are fairly new, and some haven't been shared widely because they're for the purposes of those organizations in their own sort of decision making. And there are others out there. This isn't exhaustive. And then there are various building block frameworks such as Sanitation and Water for All's. IRC and WaterAid adopted these and adapted them. And then UN Water's SDG Global Acceleration Framework. So there's a lot to start with. And what might the value added of a new tool be? I think what came across in many of the conversations is that what is lacking is the investor perspective. And so we need a tool that speaks primarily to investment decisions by both private and public sector players, and to provide information for those who are supporting investments, which is most sector organizations who are working in more of the enabling environment to enable more investment in the sector. We need something that is comprehensive and systematic and sanitation focused. Many of the tools I just presented are either the entire WASH or even broader water security. It needs to be applicable in any context, so national, subnational, city, and so on. We need a multi-level analysis of bottlenecks, as much as the WASH bottleneck analysis tool does, to identify bottlenecks of different types and levels to be addressed by different actors. It needs to be a tool that is contributed to by a range of stakeholders, tends to be more robust and demand-led, and that is the aim of this tool, to ensure that it is responding to broadly shared sector needs. And if it's used by a growing number of sector agencies, it'll lead to a common language and understanding of the sanitation economy. And if it's repeated over time, much as some of these tools have achieved, such as UN Water Glass, it enables an assessment of progress over time. And there'll be a continual improvement of the framework, and we expect it'll end up being a simple web-based tool. We'll be using Excel until we are ready to convert it into a web-based tool, but that is the intention. So these are some of the value adders that SANEMAT might have. You may claim that other tools achieve all these, and we're interested to hear from you. We certainly do not intend to duplicate, because there are many tools out there, as we have found. So we need to be clear that this meets a gap, or fills a gap. So some of the audiences that we're targeting with the tool are investors, businesses themselves, policymakers, regulators, and a range of technical stakeholders. I think most players will fit within one of these categories, and some will fit within more than one category. There'll be those who are technical stakeholder who are also investors, and so on. But the primary perspective is that of investors and businesses, with a focus more on investors. But the tool can be developed in a range of directions depending on the demand. So a successful tool, people say, is very focused. So we start with SDG 6.2, including hand washing with soap, as a broad one. And just to note that there is a parallel tool being developed at the same time on menstrual hygiene and health. And some of you may have already spoken with Sophia, who's working on that. So the sanitation economy encompasses the toilet, the circular economy, and smart digital marketplaces, which are three sort of markets that are being defined by the Toilet Board Coalition. It covers more households and less institutions. The focus is on basic sanitation with low-cost ways of safely managing excreta. So the focus is off sewage solutions, although it may still be applicable to sewage solutions. The focus is on rural and low-income urban neighborhoods, naturally. And the focus is in low and middle-income countries. But some have asked, would we be able to use this in, Europe or America? And potentially, but that's not the priority. So these are the 10 pillars that have been defined so far, really reviewing all the available frameworks out there, which you've seen, and trying to rationalize. Maybe 10 is too many, but if we can merge some, we may. So they essentially cover, and I'm going to go through this very fast, the right political environment, an untapped market, an enabling business environment, an enabling legal and regulatory environment. And these are separated because there are a lot of indicators under each one. So for the purposes of not overloading one pillar. And the availability of financing, favorable economic conditions, which are less related to sanitation, but more poverty rates and income levels and economic growth. then conducive policy environment, adequate accountability mechanisms, supportive public funding, and finally, but probably most importantly, capacity for scaling up sanitation investments and strengthening the enabling environment. So we haven't thought a lot about the presentation yet because we have to decide on the indicators, but if each pillar can get an average score based on an aggregate of the indicators within each pillar, then we can present in a radar diagram, spider diagram, or other ways for rapid understanding. And obviously different colors could denote different subnational levels, or it could denote different time periods or different countries. So there's a way we can play with this to present the information. So we might want to categorize the maturity. We have a bit more thinking through this issue to do, but usually it'd be a two-dimensional space, on one axis being the sort of untapped market or sanitation coverage, showing whether it's a saturated market or whether there's still some development possible, or whether it's very undeveloped, which would be low sanitation coverage. And then on the other axis could be the strength of the enabling environment, the investment environment, which would be you know, an aggregate of all the other pillars. So countries or subnational levels could be categorized into one of these. But as I say, we've got a lot more thinking to do on this. This would be a very high-level summary, but I think the devil is in the detail, so we'd have multiple ways of presenting information in a more detailed way. So another way to understand it, the pillars, the 10 pillars may not be sufficient for a private investor to be able to say, is a market ready for me to come into and invest? So here are 7 questions that can be answered for the private sector investor, the private investor, for which there are going to be multiple indicators. So these come from a lot of the conversations I've had, and continue to get feedback on this. But first, for a private investor, is sanitation a priority, or might it be in the future? And is the private sector recognized to be important for addressing the sanitation service gap? So if the government or if legislation is very anti-private sector in sanitation space, then it would be very hard for them to invest. And so this comes up front as one of the most important. The second is the overall size of the sanitation market an interesting investment or business expansion proposition. That's an obvious one, is the size of the market. Then there's the expected profitability. What's the difference between costs and income? We can break this down into market segments or part of the sanitation value chain. Then it's important to dig more into what determines supply cost and what determines revenue generation. So these are 2 separate additional questions to break that down, to understand if the return on investment is currently poor, what's the potential to reduce the supply cost or reduce unit cost, and what's the potential to increase revenue or tariffs, and so on. Then the 6th question, is there a conducive regulatory, public-private partnership and business support environment for investment in sanitation? So that covers 2 of the major pillars. And then the final question, and is a sort of bucket collecting all the other ones that are not considered. What other constraints and opportunities should I be aware of before investing? So they're quite loaded questions, and there have been at least 10 indicators developed for each of them. Again, this can be presented in a radar diagram or other way. We'll be thinking more about that. So to generate these scores, we need to have indicators that can be given objective scores in a way that allows aggregation. And we need to choose the right indicators. We're going through a process of short listing. At the moment, we have a very large number, and we're going through a review process currently with many partners to identify which are the priority indicators and to assess whether the 10 pillars and the 7 questions make sense. So indicators can be of many types, and our challenge, if we want to generate a score, is to present them either on a scale of 1 to 10, or a percentage, or a value that allows you to then aggregate into a single indice for each pillar and for each question, and then to generate an overall score. There are obviously pros and cons of generating these aggregate scores or indices. There's some it's questionable whether it conveys the right information to the right people, and whether scoring countries, for example, would be a positive thing to generate some healthy competition between countries or between cities in a country, or whether it's something that wouldn't be acceptable politically. That's yet to be seen. Customization will be important. So in the tool, there'll be an opportunity to shut off default indicators and to turn on other indicators that are in the indicated database. So it can be fine-tuned and tailored for each user. That would obviously reduce the comparability of the findings when it has been strongly tailored by a particular user. But it is, at the end of the day, the use case is the most important, and having scores generated in a sort of consistent way across countries can be useful for those making decisions to sort of which country to invest in. But at the end of the day, it's most important that the user who has a particular context they're working in, that they pick it up and use it in the way that is most useful to them. So as I said, there are many, many indicators. We've currently got 121 indicators for the 7 questions, and we got 83 questions for the 10 pillars. So that they don't overlap yet. We might devise it so that the indicators all overlap, so that if you fill in one set of indicators, then they'll be usable for the other. So if you do the 10 pillars, then you can generate the scores for the 7 questions. We have yet to sort of fine-tune that. So I won't go into an example, but here is an example on the investor question on market size. As you see, it gets very detailed. There are some pillars or questions where we have very little secondary information, and we would need to generate that from primary studies. There are other questions or pillars where we have more information available from global surveys and other indices, such as the World Bank's doing business or competitiveness indices. There's a number of indicators that can be drawn on and populated into this tool. So the next steps, this is a current consultation period. A proposal and an Excel sheet with all the indicators has been shared with 70 sector partners. Maybe we'll hear from most of them, we hope. We've already heard from 40 sector partners on the earlier stages of the initiative. And so we will do our best to consolidate and meet as many expectations as possible. But obviously that'll be challenging because there'll be different opinions coming across. Partners have been asked if the tool answers the questions of key users, in particular, in particular organizations such as ourselves, those on the call, who may want to pick it up and use it to attract investors. And is the tool likely to lead to more investment? Quite honestly, will it lead to more investment? So there are a number of questions we've asked around whether the 7 questions and the 10 pillars are the right ones. Does it make sense to have these 2 ways of expressing market maturity and investment readiness? Or should we try to merge it into one overall one? Are the indicators appropriate? Some of you probably enjoy going into the detail of looking at indicators, and we'd really appreciate that. And what other perspectives need to be better reflected. So we started formulating questions for public investors. We've also got some questions for technical agencies and government and regulators, but we don't want to overload the tool. We could produce all those, but then it may make the tool unmanageable, and we want to keep the primary focus on the investor perspective. So feedback is useful. The next steps, this consultation, we'll be fine-tuning it and conducting a dry run with available data, and then we'll finalize it for piloting later in the year, and then prepare for piloting in early next year. These dates are all movable depending on how quickly we move ahead with the finalization of the framework. And one open question is whether, based on the diagnosis and the scoring, whether we develop response measures, proposed response measures, so that the user has an idea of how to proceed based on a score. That's another large piece of work, but it may be useful for some users of the tool to have that available. So yeah, we'd like to hear from you on whether what I've explained is clear. Who will be the primary users? Would your organization be interested? How will investors and businesses view the tool? Should questions be developed for public investors, policymakers, and technical agencies? How important will it be to pre-populate the database with publicly available information and to keep that updated every year? And or conduct national assessments for a minimum number of countries. That is one idea we have, is to sort of generate the results for a number of countries, depending on which partners want to be involved in this. And so we have an idea of how the results might be usable. So yeah, I think that's probably enough questions, and I'm sure you have other ones. So back to Michaela for facilitating the conversation.
Yes. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to spotlight Sue as well. Just give me one moment. Spotlight Sue and spotlight. Yes. So I can see that there have already been some questions answered by Sue in the chat box. Thank you, Sue, for doing that. So I'm going to go to the latest question. Oh, Sue, you've answered them all. You're a star. Okay, we have one comment from Chabi. Sanitation and hygiene products is not difficult task, but making a realization by people about the value of sanitation and hygiene behaviors. We'll be happy to pilot the tools in Nepal. Oh, that's lovely. Thank you so much, Chabi, for your support. We have a question from Isabel Blackett. Hi, Isabel. Who is a target audience to use the tool?
I jump in?
Yeah.
This is still under discussion, right? Because the more we speak to different stakeholders, they have slightly different perspectives. And in fact, I think it's probably known that investors know what they want, right? They know their metrics, they know their indicators, and they know their impact targets, and they know they have an expectation of return of investment. What we also know is that governments have no idea about these, and if they're looking at financing strategies for the sector, or if entities are looking at financing strategies for themselves, they don't know what the expectations are because finance is so far out of reach, or it's just new as the concept to start moving beyond gap analysis and understanding return on investment. So I personally think that this has got a very strong use in the public sector, but it's also got a strong use in actually bridging that gap, because what we are missing is dialogue as well between the investors, and there is investment money out there, and this sector and the different actors within this sector. So as yet, we have not pinned it down in black and white where this will land, because as Guy said, we've spoken to, I think, almost 70 organisations now, and we're just going through the different needs that different groups are expressing.
Thank you. And then we have, I hope that answered your question, Isabel. And then we have a question from Remy that I see has been answered, but I think there's still some clearing up. So I'm just going to repeat the question. Remy asks, hi Remy, by the way, have you asked current sanitation business accelerators and support organizations what their main barriers are? And did they say a tool? And he also asked, and can the tool be used to identify which aspects of sanitation probably won't be right for investment, but essential nonetheless, as these are areas that would really benefit from sanitation hygiene fund support. For instance, safe pit emptying is really profitable. So I don't know if you both want to, tackle that.
Yeah, I can do. And sorry if I confused you even more, Remy, in a chat. So you've also asked the question about when I talked about a financing pathway. So we are not starting at one end of the value chain and working our way to the other. We're trying to look at the financing ecosystem, and that financing ecosystem needs early conversations with investors, and it needs a pipeline to be built and developed. You all know this. So we can work to help strengthen that pipeline, whether it's with SMEs or whether it's through working with municipalities, through different innovative financing. But we also need to look ahead. We need to say, okay, that pipeline isn't ready, but you cannot write off this sector. So what in the future are you going to need to be able to come in and see this as investable? And as we work through this with SMEs and others, how are you going to be business ready? How are you going to be fit for market? How are you going to improve route to market? What are your business models looking like? And in the conversations that we have with SMEs and with enterprises, is a big struggle is not only route to market, but securing market and staying in the market. So it's, again, bridging this dialogue between these two needs, where private sector, small scale, medium scale, are seeing the opportunities, as you say, not profitable, not yet right for investment, and seeing how that we can work that through. Perhaps some of it won't be right for investments, some of it won't work, and other solutions are needed. And other public-private sector solutions are needed. So this is very much about ecosystems at country level and ecosystems at subnational level, and thinking that through. Just to repeat what Guy, I think, said earlier, is that so far it's all based on guesswork. And guesswork leads you to often to the conclusion that this sector is not viable, and we simply don't accept that. And we also don't accept it in the menstrual health market, which is a different game, but has some commonalities.
Thank you, thank you, Sue. I hope that answered your question, Remy. You'll let me know if there's any more in the chat box. I'm going to invite everyone to please continue asking questions. But if there's no questions, Guy, I think it would be good to have that list of questions that you had prepared on display, and maybe that can incite more conversation. Yeah. Okay. So does anyone have any thoughts, any answers, anything, any questions that stick out that they'd like to contribute? And if you do, I'd like you to just raise your hand and then I'll unmute you and then you can speak. But yeah, we don't want multiple people speaking over each other. So if there's something that you'd like to add, please raise your hand. And then yeah, we can kick it off. So I see there's a lot of people here. So we have one question here that says, who will, if you were to use the SANEMAT tool, who would be the primary users who pick up the tool and apply it? Would your organization use the tool and how? Does anyone want to have a go?
I can have a go if you want.
Yes.
It will be super interesting, but we will never, absolutely never have the consultancy budget to populate 130 something indicators. So what's, there is existing information. I think there can be some useful work to bring it together and to have a better idea of what's missing in a particular geography, to have to start or to improve a sanitation business. And I say this because in the CBS Alliance, there's been some enterprises which started very optimistically, then realized, well, hang on, in where we are, it's not possible to do this and turn a profit. Maybe we should have realized this some time ago. Maybe we should have some people telling that. Counterfactual, maybe they wouldn't have done the wonderful work they're doing now if they had been discouraged too early. But many have gone, from being businesses to being non-profits or having managing expectations a bit more of what the investment potential is in there. So yeah, so I'm a bit worried that it would skew what Sanitation Hygiene Fund is doing towards only profitable ventures or those that only have a prospect of being profitable. And I'm not sure, that some areas really have that prospect every time. Yeah, but I think I will be curious to see what you do with it and whether you whether this comes up with the usual suspects, oh, invest in Kenya, invest in South Africa, or whether it yields slightly something a bit more surprising. And I've asked and talked enough, so please, others, get in.
Thank you, Remy.
Remy, if I can just come in. Yeah, no, thanks. And we agree with you. Not everything is profitable and not every business model will look the same. We don't want this to come up with invest in Kenya or invest in South Africa, although we are country agnostic. We believe that building sanitation economies needs the attention of governments working with the private sector. And we believe that the governments as yet are not taking the right actions to assist that process. And so we would see this not as a way of ranking and manipulating a list of countries, but rather better understanding what the market maturity continuum looks like. Yeah. And that can be in a country, in a region, or across continents, but nobody has any interest from our side on, and I think this has come through stakeholders as well, on ranking countries the way that we rank access to toilets. Yeah, I mean, that's taken over 15 years to get to, but that's not the idea here. The idea here is for local stakeholders and for investors interested in a country to understand much better what's happening.
Thank you, Sue. I see we have a question from Reto, so I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and yeah, please ask your question.
Yeah, sure. No, it was more also a comment on basically around the need of the tool or who might be able to use it. I mean, I certainly absolutely find it an extremely important task to basically have this overall analysis of the overall ecosystem and all aspects that basically play a role for ultimately investors, and what are all the elements required from a regulatory business model point of view and so on, in order that it is becoming an investable, or also where we might say, and I think there I fully agree also with Remy, there are sectors which clearly I think are not fully investables, and there I think we need to be also upfront and say, okay, there we might and still need certain grant money or at least clever result-based elements. So I think it's an extremely important task. I'm not sure that it is in the end, it should be really a tool that then everybody kind of fills in themselves, because as Remy said, I think it's a major task. So I feel it's more something that should be used as a pre-filled, a quite sizable part of it, in order that it is really useful for that communication that I think is absolutely key between all the different players in that ecosystem, because it's, as I think Sue mentioned, governments are often not at all clear what is required, that there is a potential for a sanitation economy. Investors are absolutely clueless what are often the regulatory needs and the complexities of business models and which models would work. So there is a huge potential. I'm not sure about this discussion around ecosystems. We are actually working in our field at Sevas on something quite in the same direction, which we will launch quite soon and talk about it as well a bit more. I'm not sure it is purely a tool, but I think it's more a base work for getting all these different elements together. I think it's an excellent undertaking.
Thank you, Reto. Any reactions to that, Sue or Guy?
Well, thank you, Reto. Please, first, let's get you on our contact database so that we can share the request for feedback with you. Certainly, we'll in the dry run we're going to conduct in the next 6 weeks. We will see for a number of countries, and we'll probably try a subnational level as well, what can be pre-populated and what can't. You know, drawing on data that is out there reported on by international organizations largely, but also by governments themselves. So some can be very easily grabbed, others you need to really look for it. And some is available for all countries, others is available for selected countries, or depending on whether they've done particular types of study. So the question is, you know, do we have the you know, the commitment and the investment needed to pre-populate the tool for a large enough number of countries regularly every year or so? That has to be a decision, and you know, there needs to be funding put aside for that. But of course, it agreed that it's much better that one organization or a consortium does it efficiently, rather than lots of different organizations running around and maybe doing it for the same country without even knowing they're doing it for the same country. So I think that would be a sort of public good argument for that. Yeah, I think a lot of your questions were sort of supportive of the need for the tool, and fine-tuning it to be the most impactful. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have any more comments, questions, responses to the questions that are on the screen right now? Don't be shy if you would like to. Oh, yep. Okay. We have Carolee. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself and please ask your question.
Yes, I asked already on the chat whether the fecal sludge treatment facilities would be in some way integrated into this question or into this research or classification. So in general, I would like to ask or remind all of us, when generating more concentrated sanitation activities and concentrated volumes of loads of some sort of materials that are affecting then the environment, we also would have to pay attention to what happens to it afterwards. So it is because of this reason, I would like to ask or propose to integrate in some way. I didn't see all the questions, whether there is a hint or link to these issues. What happens with the fecal sludge, or what happens with the public toilets materials or private ones, and whether somebody is ready to pay for at least for the emptying of septic tanks and then transportation and discharge into the environment, or yeah. So and the other issue is concerning the target of the questionnaires and target of certain partners. I could imagine that also the certain industries would be ready to participate and promote this tool, if it can bring answers to certain market segments, to see and to develop the market, to develop the activities. Thanks.
Thanks so much for that intervention. I mean, I think you're quite right. Looking at this through different lenses across the value chain, but also the economies within the value chain, and you've targeted the emptying and that part of it, and the potential for the private sector engagement there, or public sector, which still has to pay for it, right? And how we invest in a joined up way. And you know, when we talk to IFC, when we talk to the Development Bank of Nigeria, when we talk to BII, when we talk to EIB, they're basically looking, even at their level, for answers to the questions that Guy is beginning to narrow into. And we simply don't have the answers. We simply have to budget, and we have to talk about the cost of inaction rather than the return. And regardless of what we might all think about how sanitation should be governed or sponsored or financed, if we want to engage in these actors, beyond them telling us there's just no pipeline and there's no investability, we really do have to understand the market segments and really understand the data behind it. And we believe, as part of the UN, but just ethically, this should be public good, not tied within multinational companies where we can't access the data. and we can't really get to grips with the financing pathway for any of those market segments. So I think, again, it'd be great to have further discussions with you about this, because understanding market segmentation is an aspect of this that I think still needs further investigation.
Yeah. Please.
Thank you, Sue, for answering that. Are
Yes.
there any more questions?
Sorry,
Yeah.
Nicola, just to add on what Karoy was saying about the environmental impact. I didn't mention that the indicators would need to be broken down by part of the sanitation service chain where appropriate. So we will break it down by containment, emptying, and transport or conveyance, and treatment and disposal, and even reuse, so that we know what is the strength of each one, because it will be different, related to the policy, related to the funding, related to a lot of the indicators. It'll be relevant to break it down so that we understand what is the blockage. Is there more opportunity in emptying than in containment, or vice versa? And where is more support needed, in particular public support needed, to ensure that that point of the service chain isn't the weakest point anymore. So yes, point very well taken, and we certainly don't want this to lead to a concentration of waste that is not safely managed at the end of the day. Obviously, I mean, a lot of my engagement with countries is around the costs, and sometimes the high costs of the full service chain makes it very hard to know where to start investing. But we have to start somewhere, and the somewhere is with the toilets, to then have, we need that problem to then address. But if people don't have toilets in the first place, then we can't start. But thank you very much for your remarks.
Well, if there are no more questions, I'd like to thank Guy and Sue for this really, really comprehensive and thorough presentation, and for proposing this tool to us, and for allowing us to have our comments and give feedback. I hope that you got some nice takeaways that could be helpful in the tool development. So yes, thank you so much for joining us today.